how did these different communities help shape where you are now and what you want to do in college and then maybe right after college?
Man, I mean, when you talk about anxiety about trying to just figure out how to adjust yourself for different groups that you're interacting with, I really feel that. I mean, in one way, in terms of like helping me, it's definitely made me very versatile in trying to figure out how to navigate different environments, which is helpful from, just like a life career perspective. But growing up, it was just a lot of, like, trying to figure out how do I fit in with this group, and no matter where I was, I still felt like, "Okay, there's something missing where I'm not quite, like, in." Like, I was saying, like, experiences that I felt like my friends who, were white, like, they weren't the same at home. My experiences with other just, like, African Americans also felt very different. And then even within the Nigerian community, I felt so, I think, whitewashed that, like, I just didn't really fit in anywhere. I'm just kind of myself. And it's interesting that you mentioned code switching because I don't think I code switch. I think I just am the way I'm speaking to you now is how I would speak to anyone else. And I think there's like I don't know, maybe like a little bit of a dissonance depending on where I'm going. So for example, like whenever I went to Nigeria with my parents, it's like I can immediately clock that you're American. I have a hard time blending in that environment. I don't know, like I just more recent years I'm just like realizing like this is myself and this is who I am and this is how I'm going to show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, I don't I'm trying to consciously represent myself in a consistent way, which is a little hard. I mean, I think just to be completely vulnerable and honest here, I think for me it's a little bit hard because when I'm with people that I'm comfortable, uh, especially around people that I've grown up with, like when I'm talking to them, there's probably a little bit more of a lean to the stuff I say,
Mhm.
right? Than if I'm like in the halls of the Pentagon
Yeah.
giving a briefing
Yeah.
of some sort. But it's definitely hard. At least for me, it was definitely hard because again, it's all about that belonging and wanting to make sure that um, you were in a place where you felt you belonged, but it also, from a work perspective, I always would look around to see if there's any other minorities in the room. I was
Mhm.
like, okay, like how many other minorities are in here? Generally, it's especially in the Pentagon, it's like, okay, there's one more or two more or whatever. And that was always hard because you felt like, at least for me, I always felt like I was representing that population for that time, fairly or unfairly. For you, when you were growing up, how did that impact sort of like how you presented yourself and the situations that came up there?
So I think IQ was also very like hyper conscious of, I guess, being like the different one in the room. And because of that, going back to like anxiety, I always felt like I needed to like overperform or outperform.
Yeah.
Like if I'm gonna come into this space, like I'm coming with the likely understanding that they're without someone knowing me, um, that they maybe have a perception of what I would be like, and I would like arm myself by trying to make sure that like I don't know, I always had to show up as like excellent in all the spaces I was in. It's like, I deserve to be here. Like, I more than deserve to be here, but it's also so anxiety inducing because I felt like I could never make a mistake.
Today's episode opens up with a conversation about representation and belonging, what it means to carry your whole story into spaces where very few people look like you or come from where you come from. Our guest today, Vanessa Okoro, knows that feelings to the bone. She's someone who I deeply admire for her honesty, warmth, and willingness to rethink what success really means. Vanessa grew up in New Jersey as the daughter of Nigerian immigrants, spent over a decade in management consulting at Ernst Young, and then made the leap into the federal service with the FAA. Vanessa and I talk about what it means to navigate identity across cultures, careers, and expectations. We talk about the pressure to be perfect, the weight of representation, and the moment you decide to show up for yourself. This conversation is about the work of belonging, not the belonging that's handed to you, but the kind that you must build. It's about the excellence used as armor, about anxiety that comes from wanting to represent more than one life at a time. And it's about permission to pause, to rest, to rebuild from a place of purpose rather than performance. So, whether you're between jobs or between versions of yourself, or simply rethinking what your next chapter looks like, I think you'll find this one resonates a lot. Here's my conversation with Vanessa Okoro on identity, excellence, survival, and the long road toward a real sense of home. Let's get it.
Welcome to Life Between Titles. I'm your host, Savan, and today I've got my friend Vanessa. Vanessa, how are you?
Doing great. How are you, Savan?
I'm doing fantastic. Like we mentioned earlier, this was probably scheduled for the last month and a half with 4 reschedules. So I'm glad we're finally able to connect, and I'm glad that you're here.
Yeah, thank you. You know what? Everything happens for a reason. Maybe there's something fortuitous about this day that it was meant to be.
No, I completely agree. I completely agree. Vanessa, I want to maybe start off by having you answer a few quick questions so that the listeners can get to know you a little bit better. Maybe some fun questions so we can break the ice a little bit, and and then we could dive into maybe some things that are more top of mind for you. But before we get started, a few questions that I've asked previous guests that I'd love to know your answers to. Are you ready for this?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. Vanessa, in one word, if you had to use one word to describe what scares you right now, what would that be?
Gosh, what scares me right now? I don't know if it's a right now. I feel like this is probably a persistent thing, but probably amplified by where we are right now, but uncertainty.
Okay.
Yeah.
Expand on that for me.
Yeah, just, I've always been somebody who's had a plan for something or at least like a vision or like, okay, I can see where I'm going. And, we'll get into this, but I've had like 2 career changes in the last 2 years. And I definitely did not think this was where I was gonna be if you asked me like 2 or 3 years ago. Navigating the job market and that uncertainty is weird, kind of seeing what looks like the future, which is I don't think you're gonna be seeing a lot of people in roles for like 10 to 15 years anymore. It's like being agile and just getting ready to go on to the next thing, even though you may not know what that looks like.
Yeah, I feel the same way about so many of that. Like the stage at which we're actually playing this game is changing. The rules are changing, and it's changing pretty fast. I think it's changing a lot faster than any one of us would have expected, and it's definitely scary times. Second question, Vanessa: if you had to be a number that represents you, what number would you choose?
Where are these questions coming from? All right, a number that best represents me. I think it's like 7, probably for a couple of reasons. And, the lame one is like I was born in July, but it still feels like, lucky 7. I feel like it's just like my number. I don't know, what's yours? Like, what, like, I'm curious about like this question, how it pans out for other people.
I think we have like certain affinities
Yeah.
to things like colors and questions and
Mm,
or colors and numbers and I think it sort of grows with us over time. Like I've always loved 23
mm,
for Jordan and for the player and the shoes, and anytime I'm not a big gambler, but anytime I go to the casino, I will play roulette because that's the most straightforward one. And I'll
mhm,
always play 23, even though it doesn't win most of the time.
mm.
Um, So that's my number. But I
Uh,
love 7 as well. I think 7 isn't it like historically a lucky number for people?
yeah,
Or
I
is
mean,
that
people
6?
no, I think it's 7, like lucky sevens in gambling, but yeah, I don't know, I feel like that's always a number I've had a proclivity towards.
Oh, okay. All right. So you were born in July then. So you're a summer baby, huh?
I am a summer baby, and it is my favorite season, even though it is everyone's like, "It's so hot and gross out." I'm like, "No, it's great." People are on vacation, you get to go to the beach is one of my favorite places to be. Yeah, I like being around water, so Cancer is
Yeah.
my sign.
Yeah. I love that too. I'm a big summer fan, but for only like a month and a half. And then I just think about wanting to put on like a hoodie or a parka or something like that as I'm wearing a t-shirt in the wintertime.
I mean, my husband is like, no, like he sweats a lot, but he's just like, it's too much. Like the fall is great. That is a perfect time. But I think fall is a lie because it just rains most of the time in the fall, or it's like super windy. I'm like, no, it's not what you think it is.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's just like I like the long days, summer nights kind of vibe.
Yeah. I love that. Tell me what it was like growing up for you being born in the summer. Because I know my daughter's born in May and we can never have the her school classmates come to her birthday parties just
Mhm.
because they were too far out. What was it like growing up for you being born in the summer and being a summer baby?
Oh man, I remember feeling really sad because like, yeah, during the school year, like, people would bring their parents would bring cupcakes or treats or whatever in, and like I never got that because we were out of school, or birthday announcements that people would make, and I felt like very left out. But I mean, other than the being at school stuff, I don't know. I still really enjoyed my birthday. I feel like my parents really put in a lot of effort to make sure I had really memorable birthdays.
What was your most memorable birthday, if you can recall, or if you want to tell strangers on the internet?
Sure. No, I think one of the most memorable birthdays I had was my sweet 16, which, wasn't like a big party where everyone got dressed up. But when I was in high school, I like discovered my love of musicals. So my parents got a limousine for like me and 10 of my friends to go into New York City. I'm from New Jersey originally. And we went to dinner, and then we got to see Rent and, the musical Rent, and it
Hmm.
was just so fun because it was almost like a surprise, like, I did not know, like, I knew we were gonna go see the musical, I did not know my parents were gonna get me a limousine to go do it.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
That's amazing. I think the first time I was ever in a limousine, I was an adult as well, or maybe it was prom.
yeah.
I'd never been in one. It just blew my mind. Well, one, we could never afford it, but when I got in there, I was just thinking like, people actually live like this?
It's just like, "Oh my god," like, if I was, like, fabulously wealthy, I could do this every day.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just like it was like a cute, fun experience, and I liked it because it felt different than, a typical Sweet 16.
Yeah. That's amazing. That is amazing. And it's just the amount of thought that parents put into making sure their kids are taken care of. You mentioned that you were born in New Jersey or you grew up in New Jersey. Is that right?
Born and raised.
Yeah. How was
Interesting because I think when people hear like, "Oh, you're a Jersey girl," they have a specific, archetype of a person in mind. But
Yes.
I'm also the daughter of like Nigerian immigrants, so I feel more affinity to that than necessarily being someone from New Jersey. So, for example, everyone says like, "Oh yeah, you go down the shore, like not to the beach." And
Hmm.
I didn't go down to the shore until, like, my senior year of high school. So, like, I didn't really understand what people meant by that, and then I think when I went to college, because I went to college in DC, then I started to feel a bit more of that, like, Jersey pride thing because everyone would be like, "Oh, New Jersey, armpit of America," and I'm like, "Hey, we have the 4th best public education. system in the country.
Yeah.
It is a wonderful
Yeah.
place to raise a family. It is the Garden State for a reason. Like, your pharmaceuticals come from here. Like, all of, like, the trivia about New Jersey starts coming out. I'm just like, I did not feel this growing up.
I know. Yeah, it's funny how much you latch on to random shit about where you grew up. Like
Yeah.
um where I grew up, it was called White Center, and it was the projects when I was a kid. And I always hated it. You know, I always wanted to leave, and it was a looking back at it, it was actually a really good place for me to grow up for a bunch of reasons. But you know, when I tell people about that now, it's become so gentrified that it's not even the same thing as what it was before.
Yeah.
But also, too, I've learned so many random facts about it that I didn't know when I was growing up. Like it's still called Rat City because of all the
What?
rats that were there. Yeah. So I'm like, yeah, I grew up in Rat City. It's all good. Nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds, like, really hard. It's like, "Ooh, Rat City." Like, what happened in your part of the hood? Oh my goodness.
Yeah. No, it was a great place to grow up. A little bit about this idea of these two identities you had that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to me how, you know, people that are immigrants or that have immigrant backgrounds, how their sense of identity sort of is shaped by where they grew up. Like what was that like for you and your family growing up in Jersey and being, you know, Nigerian immigrants? Was it hard? Did you struggle with certain things?
Yeah, no, I definitely had a lot of, like, identity issues and conflicts growing up.
Yeah,
Um, so I grew up in Scotch Plains, New Jersey. Just, at the time when I was growing up, the demographic was, like, you either are Italian, come from an Irish background, or you're Jewish, one of the 3.
I see.
And so it wasn't the most diverse place necessarily. That's not to say, like, I was the only, like, Black person that lived in town, but I felt like in a lot of my classes, I was, like, one of 2 or 3. And then when it comes to, like, immigrant population, most of the Nigerians that, like, we grew up with, they weren't living in that part of New Jersey. They're more living, like, in Newark or Irvington or West Orange, which are, cities that are closer to New York. So I
Hmm.
felt like those communities, you had a lot more, people who were like you there. But for me growing up, I felt very like it was like I was operating one way when I was at school with my friends and then functioning like a different way when I was at home with my family. So for example, we'd be going out to like an event or something with my family and people not really understanding. It's like, "Oh yeah, we left to go to this wedding. We didn't go to the ceremony, but we went to the reception and then everyone was there until like 5 AM in the morning." Like,
Hmm.
I don't think that was, like, the norm for my other friends growing up. They were like, "What do you mean?" Or like, yeah, it was I don't know, it just felt, like, very different, and I didn't realize that, those experiences are totally normal. It's just within that kind of community, which I don't think I really got more integrated into until I got to college.
Yeah, I was in very similar position growing up too, and I think the term that gets used for me is code switching. There's a lot of code
Mhm,
switching,
mhm,
and I didn't know what that really meant growing up. But, you know, the experience I had was there's a sort of Cambodian side of things, which is a very strong sort of influence in my life, but I also was influenced by a lot of hip hop back in the 80s and 90s, especially
mhm.
the 90s. And so there was sort of that culture, and there was, the gang violence that we had in my neighborhood. And I had a lot of family and friends that were part of sort of that.
Mm.
And a lot of that influenced me in many ways. And then in high school, I went to a private high school called Lakeside. And that's where like Bill Gates went and Paul Allen went and all these. And so like I would always have to try to navigate these different situations in very different ways. And I, I always thought that was something as I reflect on that I don't know if it caused me to have a lot of anxiety because I'm always trying to sort of fit into these populations. For you, as you were growing up, like how did sort of like these different communities help shape where you are now and what you wanted to do in college and then maybe right after college?
Man, I mean, when you talk about anxiety about trying to just like figure out how to adjust yourself for different groups that you're interacting with, I really feel that. I mean, in one way, in terms of like helping me, it's definitely made me very versatile in trying to figure out how to navigate different environments, which is helpful from, just like a life career perspective. But growing up, it was just a lot of like trying to figure out how do I fit in with this group. And no matter where I was, I still felt like, okay, there's something missing where I'm not quite like in. Like I was saying, like experiences that I felt like my friends who, were white, like they weren't the same at home. My experiences with other just like African Americans also felt very different. And then even within the Nigerian community, I felt so, I think, whitewashed that like I just didn't really fit in anywhere. I'm just kind of myself. And it's interesting that you mentioned code switching because I don't think I code switch. I think I just am the way I'm speaking to you now is how I would speak to anyone else. And I think there's like I don't know, maybe like a little bit of a dissonance depending on where I'm going. So for example, like whenever I went to Nigeria with my parents, it's like I can immediately clock that you're American. I have a hard time blending in that environment. I don't know, like I just in more recent years, I'm just like realizing like this is myself and this is who I am and this is how I'm gonna show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, for me, I don't I'm trying to consciously represent myself in a consistent way, which is a little hard. I mean, I think just to be completely vulnerable and honest here, I think for me it's a little bit hard because when I'm with people that I'm comfortable, uh, especially around people that I've grown up with, like when I'm talking to them, there's probably a little bit more of a lean to the stuff I say,
Mhm.
right? Than if I'm like in the halls of the Pentagon
Yeah.
giving a briefing
Yeah.
of some sort. But, it's definitely hard. At least for me, it was definitely hard 'cause, again, it's all about that belonging and wanting to make sure that um, you were in a place where you felt like you belonged, but it also, from a work perspective, I always would look around to see if there's any other minorities like in the room. I was
Mhm.
like, okay, like how many other minorities are in here? Okay, generally it's especially in the Pentagon, it's like, okay, there's one more or two more or whatever. And that was always hard because you felt like, at least for me, I always felt like I was representing that population for that time, fairly or unfairly. For you, when you were growing up, how did that impact sort of like how you presented yourself and the situations that came up there?
So I think I, like you, was also very like hyper conscious of, I guess, being like the different one in the room. And because of that, going back to like anxiety, I always felt like I needed to like overperform or outperform.
Yeah.
Like if I'm gonna come into this space, like I'm coming with the likely understanding that they're without someone knowing me, um, that they maybe have a perception of what I would be like. And I would like arm myself by trying to make sure that like I don't know, I always had to show up as like excellent in all the spaces I was in. It's like I deserve to be here. like I more than deserve to be here, but it's also so anxiety inducing because it felt like I could never make a mistake. And like I'll give you an example, like when I was earlier in my consulting career, there was talk about like putting me up for a promotion from like senior consultant to manager. And I, like, pulled back on it because I was so nervous, like, in, like, that management consulting space that, okay, if I'm, like, one of a few Black managers, if I mess up, like, that's it. They're gonna be like, "No, this is why we can't be" I hate, like, bringing it back to the conversation about DEI hires right now because that is, like, manifesting some of my worst nightmares, but, like, see, this is what happens when we give someone like her a chance. So it's always pushed me to try to be perfect or again, just like I have a very high standard of performance.
Yeah, I agree. I think fairly or unfairly, we have this weight on our shoulders. We meaning I categorize minorities and immigrants in sort of like this bucket of having to represent not just the institution that you're working for, but also your dead grandparents,
Yeah,
your community,
the
and all these
legacy.
other things.
Yes, the
Right.
ancestors.
Right, right. And fairly or unfairly, right? I think there are many situations where other people don't think about stuff like that, but I know for me personally, I definitely do. I definitely think about stuff like that all the time.
I wonder, do you think part of it is the individualistic versus collectivistic, kind of culture? I know for me, a lot of it is just like how you are out in the world represents not just yourself, but your family.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I think as I'm sitting down and writing this memoir, I'm coming up with these different themes in my head that are uh, surfacing after doing these interviews. And one of the themes is around survival. And the Cambodian community at least, when we came here, we collectively came together to survive. And we collectively came together to help each other out because we don't have the luxury of having an education and knowing sort of the system. And so we had to lean on each other to do those types of things. And I think that naturally has, at least within the Cambodian community, that naturally has led us to think about things like what we're becoming anxious about, which is the representation of your community as you're going out and trying to expand, the presence of those people within your community to different places. I think the thing about at least the Cambodian community, and I'd love to hear your opinion about the Nigerian community, is when one person gets to be, let's just say, like a football player. Like I know there's one half Cambodian football player and he plays for the Seattle Seahawks. And every single Cambodian family knows who Charbonnet is. He's half French, half Cambodian. And even when I was at the DOD, it's like everybody knew there was at least one person that was there. And so the representation was a big deal because it's the foundation of it is the survival of, your community and yourself, but it's also the representation of that. I would love to hear your opinion of the Nigerian community, especially on the East Coast and where you grew up.
It's an interesting point because I think it all goes back to that excellence. It's like, okay, we're gonna glom on to this person who has truly made it in this
Hmm.
space. Like, I guess what you're describing is more national because it's like American football, like on a global stage where people be like, oh yeah, this person. Like I remember when I was like in elementary school, like, Akeem Olajuwon
Oh yeah,
in
yeah,
basketball. It's just like, oh yeah, he's Nigerian, like me. Even though like we're not from the same tribe, ethnic group, but, like, being able to see that and say, like, that person is from my culture, that person, is part of where I came from, that always feels good. While you're talking, I was also thinking about, like, education. So I think when I hear people who talk about, like, their experiences with Nigerian people, they're just like, "These very educated, very like, it's the whole everyone's either like a doctor, you're a lawyer, you're an engineer, you're an entrepreneur, and like our very bombastic like vocabulary and way of speaking,
yes.
probably inspired by the Queen's English. But yeah, I think I don't know, I think about that a lot in terms of showing up and like the representation of the community, but at the same time, I also like, like grinds my gears when people say like Nigerian friend scam.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think there's just so much history and context that we've applied to different segments of the world that at least from my perspective, there's a lot of fending off of the those misconceptions that we have to do even before we do the actual work, even
Mhm.
before we get in to, get a fair shake at like a job or an opportunity. And it's really fucking hard.
Yeah.
It's really fucking hard. Vanessa, tell me about college for you. So you said you went to college in DC. Whereabouts?
I went to George Washington University.
Okay. How
Yeah.
was that?
It was great. I always tell people, because usually when I tell somebody, "Oh, I went to GW," they're like, "Expensive." And I was like, "You know what? It was worth every penny." To me, it was worth every penny. I
Right.
really felt like that was where I was starting to grow into myself and the person
Hmm.
I wanted to be.
Hmm.
I going back to being in New Jersey, even though, like, I will defend New Jersey until the day I die, I still didn't feel like that was the place where I was gonna end up. Like, I didn't really feel like I fit in when I was in Jersey. I was looking for something bigger, and when I started doing college tours and, like, I think GW is actually one of the first places I looked at, I was just like, "I love that this is a college without, like, a boundary, like, there's no gate, like, it is in a city, it is of the city, all of your experiences are so, like, tied to DC." Like, for some people, not having a football team is, like, a deal breaker, and I said, "This sounds great to me. Love that."
Huh? Huh?
We used to have a program that, or the university used to have a program where they would leave like copies of the Washington Post, like New York Times, Wall Street Journal in the lobby of everyone's dorm. Like I loved that everyone was so engaged in like what's happening in the world. And I didn't necessarily feel that way when I was in high school in New Jersey. And that's not to say like that people like that weren't there, but I don't know, I just felt like I wanted something bigger. I really loved my time at GW, like, met some of the best friends that, like, I've ever had, and I got my master's from Georgetown too, but, like, my affinity is definitely more towards GW for sure.
Yeah, college has this way of highlighting things that we, at least as kids and teenagers, we are grasping for as we're growing up. I had the same desires. For me, I just wanted to get the hell out of Seattle.
Mhm.
I was just so fed up with it, and I made a promise to myself that I'll never come back to Washington, and here I am.
So
But yeah, I went to Occidental for my first year. I was gonna be a writer, and I studied history. And from a sort of a macro perspective, just looking at the places that you choose to spend the next 4 years of your life, there are certain drivers, at least for me, like I wanted to be at a place that where people thought critically, and I didn't really know exactly sort of how yet, but just having sort of that influence was a big deal to me of people with that same, disposition for an education. For you, what were some of the big things that you took out of your college years in terms of helping you come up with what you wanted to do after college? Like, were there experiences that or professors that influenced you there?
yeah, so this is such an interesting question because and I think this is kind of where it comes where excuse me, when I say like it fundamentally changed me,
Hmm.
I would I would say, like, one of the experiences that I had that kind of really brought me to where I am today was working in the office of undergraduate admissions. My work study job, yeah, mhm. It wasn't even
Okay.
so much about class, it was so when I went to GW, I part of why I wanted to go to a school like that was like, okay, you have so many majors, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Like, I could probably figure out something. I wound up landing on international affairs, but honestly, I think that's just because almost everybody was in the international affairs school.
Right.
But when I started working I was a sophomore working in the undergraduate admissions office, and I was also a tour guide. And growing up, I was very shy. I felt very shy and very awkward, but
Really?
yes, extremely, extremely. I was very shy, I'm still an introverted person, but like public speaking was like my worst nightmare. And it just always made me very nervous, but when I was a tour guide, and that whole program obviously being run by the admissions office, I started learning how to get more comfortable talking to, like, large
Mhm,
audiences, and getting more comfortable and just, like, speaking, talking about myself,
mhm.
and I don't know, and it started to get fun, like, making jokes, stuff and making connections with people. That felt really good. But part of like the part about working in the office was I was learning about the business of higher education, and I never really
Oh,
about
it
business when I went into college. I thought it like about history and like political science. And I was just like, oh, this is really fascinating because what we're doing is like really just marketing at the end of the day. And um and thinking through that, I was just like, okay, I think that's actually a fields like I want to go into. And I think the easiest way for people who are not business majors to get into business was consulting. It turns out I
Oh.
was in a great city to do that. But I don't think without that experience and thinking about like the bigger picture of the way like a university operates, I mean,
Yeah,
of course, it's about the education and the professors, but it's like there's a machine behind it driven by money and like
yeah.
where revenue comes in and like alumni relations and all of that. So by the time I graduated, yeah, I realized it's like I think I want to pivot and take more of a business focus rather than just pure government.
Did you go to Georgetown right after getting your undergraduate?
No, I graduated in 2009 and I went into Georgetown in 2013. Yeah.
Okay, so there was, a period of time there where you were working or doing other things. What did that look like?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, starting with graduating in 2009, God, I was just like, give me anything, give me any job.
I mean, that was the height of the recession,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That was quite a time, especially for someone who's just like, oh, I think I want to get into something more business oriented with no business
Right,
background. Um,
right.
but because we're in DC, obviously, with the Recovery Reinvestment Act, there was so much money being pumped into the federal government. So then, by that nature, obviously, government contracting, which is what I pretty much went into for those first 5 years,
Mhm,
just also to facilitate my entry into consulting. But when I was doing that work, I was doing a lot of like IT project management work,
mhm.
and it didn't like I was just like that. I was basically said, like, "This will not be my life forever." And part of why I went to Georgetown was because, like, a friend of mine, she went to their PR and corporate communications program, and when she was telling me about it, I was just like, "This sounds like something I would be very interested in doing." So I was trying to use that as a way to pivot away from just, like, doing the government contracting thing, which, I graduated from that program in 2015 and then still wound up in consulting, just at a bigger firm.
Right.
But I was getting an opportunity to do more of the work that I wanted, so it wasn't really project management, it was more about the organizational change management.
Yeah, I always wonder how people get into consulting because it's such a vast and somewhat ambiguous role. How did you pick that? Like, were there certain stipulations that you had for yourself that said, like, okay, if I hit these things, I'm going to be a consultant?
Not necessarily. I think when I first heard about the concept of consulting, I was just like, "Oh," like, at the end of the day, I think for me as a person, I wanna help people. Like, I wanna be, like, useful in helping solve problems. So, when I first started, like, hearing about consulting, like, for my friends who are older, like when I was like a junior and there were seniors and they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna go apply to work at Deloitte or Bearing Point or something back in the day." Um, I was just like, "Oh, that sounds interesting and that sounds like something I could do." Um, but I don't know, yeah, like it's interesting because I think of consulting as being it's the same as being undecided in college, and I think I still felt very undecided. Yeah, it's just like,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna try a bunch of different things until I figure out what the real thing is that I wanna do. I think that's, like, really how I thought about consulting. Like, I still
Hmm.
haven't figured out what I wanna do when I grow up, so let me just, like, go into this for a while.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. What was the worst part of being a consultant?
It's so much the worst thing, but I think the thing, looking back at the 15 years I was in consulting, it was feeling like I couldn't actually affect any change because at the end of the day, I was always gonna be an outsider. And the other part of it that I felt like really challenged by, and I think I recognized this more when I had transitioned into government service, was I struggled feeling like I was making genuine relationships
Mm,
with people. I like, the whole thing was like, "Oh, yeah, the basis of our business is our relationships. Like, don't think about it like you're gonna go sell work. You're just, like, trying to get to know people." I was just like, "No, no, no, no. You're not paying me to go, like, make new friends. You're paying me to
right.
people who are gonna be willing to give me money to deliver work." And, like, I definitely valued a lot of my client relationships, but I felt like a marked difference when I became a Fed, and I was just like, "Oh, people aren't, like, apprehensive about talking to me." It felt, like, so much more genuine and real. So I think having, like, real genuine relationships, that was something I struggled with being a consultant.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's hard. I've been on both sides, and it's definitely hard because there's a lot of skepticism if you're a consultant or you're a contractor and you're coming into the government and you're trying to explain to them the value that you're going to bring
Mhm.
and why it's worth their time. And I think that's like 90% of the work there is just trying to get in the door so you can actually have honest
Mhm.
conversations.
Yeah.
um the transition to being in the federal government from a consultant, tell me, how did that happen? What were some of the conversations you were having? And what was sort of like the main driver for making that switch?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Before I had gone into government, I was working at Ernst& Young for 10 years. So, like, after I had left my graduate program, basically, I got scouted to come to EY.
Hmm.
After being there for 10 years, going from, like, senior consultant to manager, manager to senior manager, at the senior manager level, I was feeling I don't wanna say burnt out because it really wasn't about the burnout, I was feeling disconnected from the work, like, literally, I was disconnected because I wasn't doing the work anymore. I was ministering everything around it, like, I'm talking to clients, making sure invoices are getting paid, approving timesheets, and I felt like I was doing so much of that, that I was getting further and further away from the root of why I wanted to do consulting, which was helping clients.
Right.
So that was 1. 2, if I was going to go to the next level in my consulting career of being like a partner and executive, the idea of saying I'm a career consultant without having actual experience on the other side, there was something about that that felt very disingenuous. Like,
Mm,
how am I gonna come in and tell you I have all of these amazing ideas for how you operate without actually having that experience? So that was 2, and then the 3rd, it just kind of goes back to, like, purpose. Again, like, when I got to that level at senior manager, yes, we wanna help build a better working world, but we're also not a nonprofit. We're here to make money, as opposed to going to essentially, I had gone over to my client side. The Federal Aviation Administration had been my client for a very, very long time. Like, you're just so much closer to the mission, and it felt different in terms of, like, motivations for doing the work. So, I would say those are my big 3 reasons for making the switch.
Yeah, I had an interesting text conversation with a friend this morning, and she was telling me about one of her late night, early morning musings. And she said, and she's a minority as well, and she said, you know, when I was growing up, that you wanted to get to that next level every single time, get
Mhm.
that promotion, that title change, and to now she's like, so with that gone, what do you think are drivers for success? How do you measure if you're successful? How do you measure if you are doing the right thing? And for me, it was a hard question because like I'm struggling with that now. You sort of like you take a look at the opportunities that are out there, and I mean, even your search history and LinkedIn, there's certain parameters that you want to hit in terms of titles and whatever. And I always think it's interesting when people make drastic switches. They're going from, either the private side to the government side, or they're going from like a nonprofit to an education or something like that. When you were making that switch and you knew that you weren't getting these benefits of working at Ernst Young anymore to working in the government, what were some of the things that worried you about, you investing time now as being a federal employee? Were there things that sort of gave you a little bit of pause? And I'll give an example. Like when I went to the DOD from working, at Carrier and Amazon, like I was worried about the amount of tools and accessibility to users that I historically had. And that was like a big worry for me as, somebody who's has that design background. For you, when you made that switch, what were some of those worries that you had?
So I think the biggest worry that I had was, like, it really did kind of go back to titles. I was leaving,
Hmm.
a senior role to essentially take a step back to be more of an individual contributor. I wasn't gonna be managing anybody, which was nice to have the break, but and it was a fear, but I think it actually did become realized when I went over to government, and I don't know if it's just, like, the generational divide, but because I was not in a manager role, I don't think people like, they didn't see or think about, like, the years of experience I was coming in with. Like, I feel like I had to really lean into that. So I'm coming here with 15 years of experience. I also think part of my concern or worry is, like, I present young, and I'm not saying that in, like, a way to brag, it's just, like, I have been told this. So, like, I remember one day I had gone and I met somebody, or, like, I had done a briefing or a presentation, and somebody, um very kindly pinged me afterward and said like, "Hey, can I talk to you for a moment?" And I said, "Sure." And they told me like, "You hold yourself like so well, like your presentation style is wonderful. One day you're going to make a great manager." And I was like, "Ooh, okay. All right. It's just it was weird for someone not to see me as what I was before, which was
Right.
someone who was about to go into like executive leadership. Like it felt like you had de-aged me by like 10 years. And that like kind of hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely does. When I was at DDS, everybody was the same level. We were all I didn't know the levels at all. I didn't even know what I was signing up for, but we were all digital service experts, which going into something like that, like I don't know what the hell that was. Like what the hell is a digital service expert? You
Yeah.
tell anybody that's not in that realm what that is, they're like, "What? So what do you do?"
Hmm.
It's like I just do stuff they give me.
Yeah.
And it was very weird after managing pretty large teams to go in and just be an expert at something. And I always, I found it to be a double-edged sword because I think when you are at a place of seniority and you have sort of like that experience built up, you can go in and you could do certain things. You can have a certain amount of weight that you pull when you need to make decisions. Whereas, like, if you're coming in as just like an individual contributor, a lot of that doesn't sort of like, it doesn't hold the same amount of weight, at least I didn't think it did. And it was really hard because you're like, I've been doing this for 20 years. I know exactly sort of what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
Like
Like,
this
do
is
you
not
know I'm sorry, do
anything
you know
new.
who I am?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, tell me about your time with the FAA. Like, I think that's where we met. Was
Yeah. Mhm.
we were. This was. It seemed like a lifetime ago now. But
I know.
how did you choose to plant your flag there? I know that that was one of your clients, but you know, ultimately choosing to plant your flag somewhere, I think, is a big commitment. And then, two, what were some of the things that surprised you, like when you finally got to be a government employee?
In terms of, like, planting my flag, like I'd mentioned before, so when I was at GW, I eventually wound up being an international affairs major. And when I was coming out and going into, like, government contracting consulting, I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna target State Department and USAID. Those are the clients that I wanna work with to stay in the international space." When I went to EY, my client I had a couple of different clients. I had, like, GSA, VA, and then I had FAA as, a customer. There were felt Something felt very different when I got to FAA, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I was like, "Why does this feel so different?" Because I did have, State Department and USAID as clients, in the
Right.
past, and I was like, "Something about this feels different." And I think for me, going to FAA, while I fully respect the mission and the work that diplomats and international development specialists do, it didn't feel as tangible and real, like, for most American citizens. Like, most people, if you're not flying from a broader Department of Transportation perspective, like, you're using the roads, you've used transit, you've, been on ships, like, it just felt so real in that element of safety, like, there was, and this I'm just speaking from my experience, I think a level of pretension that and an air of importance, and I'm not saying it wasn't important, that I experienced when I was working with the State Department that melted away when I went to FAA, just like, it's about the safety and the mission and, like, keeping people safe in the sky. Pure and simple. That is what it's about. There's no ego there because we don't have time for that. And I loved it. In terms of coming into my first year at FAA, like, the year and a half that I spent there was some of the most rewarding time in my entire career. I have such a deep, deep, deep respect for air traffic controllers and the work that they do, especially after getting to, like, visit towers and see what, like, they're doing, the stress that they're managing. Like, I was just so proud to be part of that mission. I loved it so much. In terms of what surprised me about coming into government, something that I really hadn't thought of, and I wish I had more time to explore it, was engagement with industry was different as a Fed.
Hmm. Okay.
Like,
What does that look like?
I forget that, part of why, like, so many companies come and headquarter to DC is that, like, influence from the government, and I never thought about the weight that carried with saying, like, "Oh, I'm representing X, Y, and Z agency." And we were working on a project at the time, like, last year, to build up, like, an innovation center, um, in the DC headquarters, and getting to do a bunch of research and reaching out to partners on the government side, but also in industry. Like, we reached out to, like, Capital One's, their innovation lab, the different consulting firms around, like, just being able to reach out and say, "Hey, I'm working on this project." And by nature of it being, like, in support of the federal government, people were like, "Oh my God, yes, absolutely. How can I help?" I was not expecting that kind of response from industry. Yeah, to get involved and help support something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we did more of that in government where, you would try to sort of expand the aperture at which you're actually looking at problems. Because
Mhm,
I think sometimes we become so like tunnel focused on a problem and we always assume that we know the answer because it's historically been done a certain way. And then it sort of pigeonholes us into these situations where we're like, oh, we just spent $50 million building this thing.
mhm.
And we could have avoided a lot of that if we actually like maybe brought in a few more experts that knew exactly what they were doing
Yeah.
in the beginning.
Yeah.
What's what types of work are you doing right now that is making you excited? And it could be either, actual work or hobbies or things like that you're working on.
So, great question. I don't think in this conversation we brought it up, but obviously, like I volunteered to be part of the deferred resignation program. So I volunteered to resign from my role at FAA. And so, like, I haven't been actively working in an office since April. And honestly, like, there's stuff that I've been thinking about, but really what I've been trying to work on is just existing, just
Tell
being.
me more about that.
Like, I'm not in school. I'm not in school anymore. Like, so I had to spend a lot of time thinking about, like, okay, where am I going? And I really want to do things that make me feel fulfilled. And in order to do that, I need to get over this idea of like having a title. And I was thinking about it, when I was in high school, I was just like, well, I am an honor student and I am a varsity athlete. And then when I was a college student, it was just like, okay, I'm on the dean's list. And then I was a consultant. And now like I was always associated with something and I haven't really had the time to just like focus like on like who am I outside of all of those things. So I've been honestly doing a lot of work to think about like what is it that I really want to do. And I think the consistent thing, going back to what I said about why I wanted to go into consulting, is I want to be able to help people. I like the idea of helping people kind of just think through problems and, help them make decisions or help them figure out how to make a decision or like illustrate something that they'd never thought of. So, what I've really been working on, in this time that I haven't been working, was exploring the world of coaching. And yeah, so I got my own coach who introduced me to his network of coaches. Like, and I've had conversations with so many people and built up my network around these folks that all have like their different approach and focus areas on coaching. But all of them, when I talk to them, they're just like, I'm really happy that I did this. I really feel like this is my true purpose. And I really feel like in the long run, that's really where I wanna take my career, where I think I can add the most value to others while still staying true to myself. So that, like, in terms of a project, like, thinking about, like, programs that I wanna look into, that's given me a lot of energy. Thinking about, like, what kind of company I could set up, that's been giving me a lot of energy. But even outside of that, just being able to sit down and do the work of, like, spending time with myself and just chilling, like, if that means, like, me going to the gym in the middle of the day and, just being fine with that, or, like, I have loved being able to take, like, a 2-mile walk every morning.
Yeah.
Just, like,
Yeah.
appreciate the world around me, like, in this time, like, those have been a lot of the things that I've been putting a lot of my energy and time into.
It's a lot harder than you think to do that, to consciously do that. And I've said it on previous segments. I struggle I struggle resting
Mhm,
and doing that because like I'm constantly thinking about or trying to do something. I feel like if I'm not doing those things, then I'm wasting my life away or I'm wasting these opportunities. And I get into these like cycles of, you know, just really feeling bad about resting or working out or going for a run
mhm,
when it's healthy,
mhm,
right? It sort of helps keep you grounded. And the other thing I wanted to ask you, Vanessa, was from from a coaching perspective, what does that look like? I'll give you a little bit of background to this question. So I had an executive coach for a minute when I was with Rebellion Defense, and she was fantastic. She just taught me a bunch of stuff that I didn't sort of know that I was doing or that I wanted to do. But I also didn't know sort of like what her job entailed. Because I was like, okay, like you get a coach, what do they get you? Because I can understand a coach from a team perspective, like you're guiding them to a championship, but like from a life perspective, what does that look like?
So the consistent thing that I have heard from all of my conversations with other coaches is that, first of all, coaching and consulting are not the same thing. And you
Hmm.
need to get very comfortable with that idea because you're not telling somebody what to do, you're helping them figure out
Right.
what they need to do,
Right. Right.
which I was just like, "Ooh, yeah, that's a good point." But then I feel like, "Ooh, is someone gonna feel like they're getting what they actually need out of working with a coach or, like, working with me?" And I had to kind of take a step back and think about it, even though coaching and consulting are not the same, like, how I would interact with some of my clients, especially when, like, I was just checking in with them, just kind of asking questions to help them think a bit differently, but I wasn't telling them what to do necessarily. And that's kind of where that's what I wanna orient my coaching around, but it's hard because I don't want someone to feel like, well, if I'm supposed to find the answer myself, then, like, why did I bother, like, working with you? It's more like trying to give an outside perspective, but I'm not gonna tell you what the answer is because, like, you're gonna know what the answer is. And in the grand scheme of coaching, like, what kind of coaching do you wanna do? That's something that people have asked me before, and I think a lot of people think about executive coaching. The kind of coaching I wanna do is I wanna work with people who are in the pipeline to be executives because
Nice.
yeah, I think I think people get coaching in their careers way too late. To help people understand, first of all, do you even want that next step? And I guess I'm thinking about my own experience because understanding why you're going to make your next move is gonna be, I think, a critical part of whether or not you're gonna be successful in it. Because if you don't know why you're gonna go up into this new role or you feel like you're being pushed into it, you're gonna really have a hard time being successful because there's so much pressure at that level that you really need to know that you want to do this. I also think there's an opportunity there because in talking with others for a long time, they usually say, "I wish I had gotten coaching before becoming an executive to prepare me for it because by the time I got there, I just didn't know what I was doing." Yeah. So it's almost like I just catch people.
That that's it's a powerful thing, and I don't know. There's certain skill sets that I think work that you have to work on to be effective as a leader. That without the opportunity, you can't work on those skill sets, but you don't get those skill sets without the opportunities. So you're in this catch 22, and for me, the one thing that I appreciated from the coach that I had was I would bring her situations that were real for me, and I'd say, I am in this position where I need to get this thing signed so we can move forward with whatever project that is. But I know I'm going to get pushed back on it because whatever, right? Like, not enough engineers, not enough money. We have these other initiatives, and I need to try to figure out how I can orient myself and, the way I'm presenting this project to be the most successful. And so, like, she did a lot of walking through it. She didn't know what the project was or the intricacies of the business, but like she knew and she understood how I thought about things and how the other person could potentially react to it. And that was so invaluable to me from us. And like, I actually think, the way that she thinks about things is very, very helpful from your perspective as you're learning to be a coach. What are some things that you know, training yourself on, or you're reading, or you're consuming to sort of help you get into that mental model of coaching other people?
That's a really good question. So, I think the first thing is what I had mentioned before, that, like, understanding, like, you're not giving somebody an answer. You really are, but you're asking the right questions to help them think about what the answer is. I think I'm also, I don't know. It's hard because I'm still, like, thinking and learning about like what coaching is and like what it really how I want to go into this practice, it's I think the area that I'm really trying to focus on is not that have not done this before, but just continuing to lean into the energy of asking questions. Keep asking questions and keep being curious about the person because I think the more that you dig in and ask questions, the more will come to light, not just for that person, but also for me to help in the guiding and the navigation. So getting better at asking questions. And I think one of the things that I had learned was don't ask people why when you're asking them questions because it almost feels like you're putting them in a position where they need to defend themselves. So, like, I had always been taught, like, don't ask yes or no questions. So you don't just get a flat answer with no explanation behind it. But hearing someone say, don't ask somebody why, but like, well, how did you get to this conclusion? Or what is it that makes you feel this way? It kind of
Yeah.
shifts the tone of the conversation. So that's also something I've been trying to practice and think about a bit more intentionally.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just the way that we approach situations and the skill sets that we need to be successful in those situations. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts on listening,
Mhm.
right? The skill set and how hard it is for people like me to actively listen to people and then be able to reflect on those things, like, because I like to talk. Like, I like to,
Mhm.
tell stories and do those things, and it's definitely been a skill set that I've been working on the last couple years. For you, when you're talking to these coaches, how do they help prepare you to listen better, or are they helping you prepare to listen better?
So the conversations that I've been having with coaches, I think it's not so much about the listening better. I think it's
Mhm.
more just understanding that coaching can look like a lot of different things and how they execute against, their values and what's important and how they want to show up as coaches. Also like more practical things like, okay, like what's your like business model?
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
all that stuff. But all of them will place an emphasis on being able to listen and asking the right questions, but it's really just been more about understanding how they got to the point that they wanna be coaches or understanding, I don't know, like what changes that they needed to make in terms of their own thinking to prepare to kind of take this kind of path for their own career. Yeah.
Vanessa, as you are in this transition period, what are some things you're doing now that's different than when you were going from Ernst and Young to FAA, or even from when you were going from graduate school to Ernst and Young? Like, what are some things that you're changing up this time around?
So I think as I'm in this space now, one of the things that I'm really trying to be more intentional about is really understanding what is my goal in doing the next thing. And I say that because while I'm thinking about the coaching thing in the long term, I have to think about like short term. Okay, what income am I going to
Right.
bring
Yeah.
in? So thinking through, and like searching for jobs my like having a title like senior manager or director may not happen and being
Hmm.
comfortable with that. So like when I was deeply uncomfortable with the switch from being like a leader, senior manager to an individual contributor, but not being recognized for the experience that I had, I think being able to let go and just know that whatever I'm doing next is more of a stepping stone. It may not necessarily be it could be a destination. I don't know. But being more open minded towards understanding this is a step in a bigger journey and not getting hung up so much on the prestige or the title. And also, I think thinking about how that can be freeing because I don't need to kill myself
Yeah.
necessarily for something that
Right.
is not really the end goal.
Yeah, it's amazing how much your ego comes into play when
Yeah.
you're looking at things, right?
Woo.
How do you what types of things are you doing to help maybe keep that ego in check when you're looking at these short-term
Mm.
next possibilities? What are some things that you're doing to keep your ego in check?
Talking through it with my friends, honestly. Yeah.
You're
Yeah,
right.
because I have had a number of phone calls where I'm like, "Can you believe this? This is what's out here. Are you serious?"
Uh-huh.
And it's usually them saying, "Well, you could, because if you really want the title,
Mhm.
like, you could honestly just go back into consulting and you'll get that. But I don't think that's what you want. You want it." So I think it's just that constant reminder that this is a small piece of a bigger story. And I also think, going back to what I was saying about, like, I've always been a thing. I've been an honor student. I've been a whatever. The work that I've been doing to just like focus on, like, well, this is just Vanessa. So, like, I think it's just a lot of like trying to recenter with myself and remembering what's most important. But like, I am truly grateful for the friends that I have who can, like, I can reach back out to, who can like smack me back into, like, this is what you're actually trying to do. Like, and also remembering I've accomplished so much
You
already.
have.
Like,
Yeah.
you did the thing. There's nothing else for you to really prove. So, yeah, I think those are a couple of things that I'm trying to do, but also giving myself the grace to know that I will probably backslide and that ego will come into play, but probably figuring out how to not let myself like stay in that space
Yeah.
long.
It's such a it's such a slippery slope when you start to think about what you want to invest your time into next. And then you start to compound that with how is it going to impact how I look, when I'm at the next job after that job, or, how is it going to position me for whatever it looks like in 5 years? And it's always hard. It is always hard. And the other thing that you mentioned that I thought was super interesting was, and I did this too when I was younger, just always having that next thing to chase, whether it's like Dean's List and stuff
Mhm.
like that. But I also think and this is just my personal hot take, it was easier, at least for me as a kid and as a young adult, because I knew what those titles were and I knew what those accomplishments were, right? It's like, okay, I want to get a 4.0 and then I want to do these things. And they were like very tangible things in my head. And the challenging thing about the situations that we're all in now is there isn't anything tangible out there. Nobody's telling you there's a dean's list that you need to work for. And so it makes it exceptionally harder to position yourself to be successful in that way. And so you got to like think about it in slightly different ways.
Yeah, there's no roadmap. Yeah, and that, I think, going back to what you asked me the question about, like, what's the word that makes me nervous, that uncertainty, because it's like I feel like I'm
Hmm.
navigating woods without a compass, and I'm just like hoping for the best, but realizing, like, hey, your survival skills and your ability to make decisions, that's what you can rely on. Like I also said earlier, I think this is just going to be the way of the world going forward, not just because of the place that, like, where you are in your career, where I am in my career. I think for everybody, no matter what level, it's like the world is changing so quickly. Like,
Hmm.
the roadmap's going to change and you're not going to know. Well, it's just being able to stay agile and stay centered, and get comfortable with that uncertainty.
Agree. Vanessa, last question of the segment, and take your time to answer this. But if you could have any title for your next job, and it could be a fake one or a real one, what would that title be?
I did this exercise with my coach earlier. So,
So you should know the answer. You should know the answer here.
but the thing is, like, I didn't have an answer, and I honestly, like, I hate to say it, I still I still don't think I have it now because I don't think there is a title, and maybe this comes from being somebody who's, like, a generalist and, like, just kinds of goes like, I mean, maybe, like, problem solver would be my title, but, like, I don't think that's it. I think this is, like, the challenge of being, like, a generalist, like, I could be anything. The world's my
Yeah.
oyster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that it speaks very well because I think generalists have this natural disposition to be inquisitive by nature, and so you're always, you know, seeing why and how things work, and actually have the commitment to follow up with some sort of action. There's a lot of people that just ask why and ideate all day
Yeah.
without doing anything,
Yeah.
but I think to have sort of like that follow up of having a plan to figure out sort of like why that thing is the way it is, you have to be wired a certain way. And I think I mean, your history shows that you've been doing that very well. And being a generalist, I think sometimes it's hard when you're trying to interview for places and you say, "Hey, I'm good at everything and I like to know everything." But also, when you're depending on sort of the situation, generalists are the best thing to have. Like if you're a startup, you want to hire a generalist. You don't want to have somebody who just does one specific thing and can't do anything else. That would be horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like that's just such a strength, I guess, and maybe this goes back to answering your original question about the title, but one of the biggest compliments I think I ever got, or one of the ways someone described me, was, "You're a utility player. I can put you in any
Mhm.
position, and I know you're gonna
Yeah.
be successful at it, or you'll figure it out." Yeah. You're a Swiss Army knife.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say like the Batman utility belt. That's what I thought of
Oh,
initially.
yeah. That too, yeah.
Man. Well, Vanessa, that wraps up our segment. I just want to say I appreciate you. I wish you well on the coaching stuff. I know that's sort of like the long plan, but I think that would be fantastic for you. Just, with the few times that we've talked and understanding your story, I think you would be a fantastic coach. So I wish you well there, and thank you for joining us on the segment.
Thank you so much, Savan. This has been a wonderful experience. I'm also really looking forward to see where you're going with the podcast and your memoir when it comes out. I think we're both in for a very interesting ride in the next year or so. So I also wish
Yeah.
the best for you. But thank you again for taking the time to chat.
All right, my friend. I appreciate you. Have a good one. I'll
You
talk to
too.
you later.
Bye.
All right. Bye bye.